pleasure of Sarah Katherine Schmidt. Good morning or good afternoon to you as well, Sarah.
Good morning and good afternoon to you, Julian. Thanks so much for allowing me to be here.
That's always good. I always get confused sometimes who I'm speaking to or what part of the world people are in, actually. So that's why I
That's
say both.
okay.
But
That's
who
okay.
knows?
I'm
People
from North
listening.
Carolina, so we're waking up here and having our coffee. So
So you are the VP of Customer Experience for PeopleLogic. PeopleLogic creates a suite of AI-enabled and seamlessly integrated products that enhance the people experience, highlight opportunities for scale, and drive organizational success. And we're going to be exploring how the brain works in response to change. We're going to get a little bit sciencey, and I think people enjoy that, like that, and that's understanding what's going on in their brains when they're in response to change. But before we get into that, Sarah, I'd like to ask you, what do you love about what you do?
thank you for the question and the intro to People Logic. So what I love about what I do is that I spent the first 15 years of my career in people operations and human resources leadership roles. And so I've taken all that I've learned, the ups, the downs, the highs, the lows, and brought that to People Logic to support our customers. And so I've been in the seat where our customers are our HR leaders that are looking to drive high performing teams and build more agile, performant organizations. And I get to help coach and guide and direct a little bit of those efforts for them so that they have a partner in that work.
Fantastic. Sounds great work, and sounds like you enjoy it and you've got a passion for it.
I do. If it's coming through in my energy, it's there because it's really exciting. It's the culmination of a lot of really hard work that I'm excited to continue doing in a different way.
So we're talking about how our brain works, and I want you to start to explain to us, and almost we're going to go straight in really with this, is how does our brain sort of typically respond when we're faced with change? That could be organizational change, could be a change in your team, could even be change outside of work. It doesn't always have to be in a context of work, because we know our brains are the same in either context. So what are your thoughts on that?
Sure, absolutely. So our brains respond in many different ways. And I think about Elizabeth Kubler-Ross. If anyone is familiar with Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, she defined a grief curve, and it's been modified to be a change curve within organizations where you go through all of these series of emotions while you're entering change. And this happens in your life, this happens in your work. But essentially, there's that first denial and fear of something new. And that's when our fight or flight response just sort of kicks into high gear. What does this mean for me? How do I either flee towards this or flee away from this or move towards it if I'm excited about that? And so our brains initially go to, is this safe for me to engage in as a change? Because change is scary, change is hard, and ultimately it unsettles us. And so we have a lot going on in our brains from a neurotransmitter perspective that, there's the dopamine response of excitement, there's the serotonin response of, motivation, but there's also that fight or flight. It's like, is this the right thing to do? Can I change?
So we've got a lot going on in our brains, and this is all like autopilot, isn't it? And we know that the reason that our brains respond like this is to do with survival. That's
Mhm.
the only thing that's going on here. And our brain, anticipates everything. So even a small change to be a saber-toothed tiger, and to try and protect us, and it just goes into a hardcore wired overload. What are the sort of things can we be aware of that this is happening to us, and we can sense it? What can we feel and to be mindful of, so we can, just because I think sometimes we don't always know it's happening, and we're already in that sort of spin of it all, don't we?
Sure, we're already in that spiral or that spin. And so that's where a lot of the work that I do around coaching leaders and individuals as an executive coach is to become more self-aware. So when you feel something in your body, when you notice that there's something different in your environment, it's hard to automatically tune into that because the spiral is happening while we're trying to tune in. So they're at odds with one another, honestly. But the more self-aware that you become through tuning into your emotions through taking time out for yourself to understand what you're processing, how you're processing it. If you can stop that place between change, stimulus, and response, and just have that little window to say, okay, how do I want to process this? How do I want to react or respond? That self awareness is going to drive whatever that response is to the change, and that's where ultimately it can be a change for the positive. But we have to be self aware enough to know how we want to respond, if that makes sense.
Because all the feelings can be seen as data, aren't they? It's just data for our system. We can use this, can't we?
Absolutely. What's really interesting is, neuroplasticity within the brain and the brain's ability to change based on stimulus and response. What becomes challenging within change is that our brain often goes back to the place where we've experienced a previous change. And so that data is cemented in us. We have experienced a similar change, or we are averse to that type of change, and that data sort of cements us where we are. But the brilliant opportunity is to actually embrace the change and form those new neural pathways. Similarly, if we've experienced a positive change in the past and we map that positive change onto this new change, that data is going to show that we'll embrace that change a little bit easier, a little bit quicker. It's still going to be hard, but it's the data in the past that's actually dictating a little bit
Mm.
more of your response and your reaction.
And how can we, you talked about that before, about the sort of stimulus and that gap between the sort of
Mhm.
response and the reaction to what the information we're getting. What can we do, or what have you found yourself personally, or you found with people you've worked with, strategies or ways that can sort of create that awareness, but almost that pausing before you go off and start
Mhm.
reacting and your chemicals in your body start going crazy?
Sure. So I actually heard, the stimulus, the space between stimulus and response, and there's a choice there. I heard that in a yoga class, and it stuck with me. I can't go to a 1 hour yoga class when there's a stimulus and I need to respond, right? But I can potentially move my body in a different way. I can go for a walk. I can get up and stretch. the, you have to find what works for you almost in that space, but you
Mm.
have to get unstuck is the way that I think about it. So if I'm finding out about a change when I'm talking with you and I have that stimulus in my mind, I may say, Julian, I'm going to take a moment and I'm going to breathe. Or I may get up and I may move around the room while we're continuing to talk about that change. But you've got to move that energy through your body so that you can get to that place of response. And ideally, it's that positive response or that embracing response, or it's the honest response that you need to continue processing it.
And are we trying to put here some logic onto the response? Is that what we're trying to do
Mm,
here? Is that what's happening here? Do you think? Because I know, like mindfulness, I know, which obviously yoga creates mindfulness,
mm,
creates a more of a connection to your prefrontal cortex, which is all about logic, clarity, as opposed to your midbrain, which is just your amygdala.
mhm.
I was wondering if what you're doing there, are you then just creating a bit more time to get logic to kick in, I guess?
Yes, absolutely. You're trying to do a little bit of calming of the amygdala. Ooh, amygdala. Thanks, y'all. Amygdala, a little bit of calming of that part of the brain so that you can engage your cognitive part, your prefrontal cortex, in formulating a response. And that's that space where it's either the breath work or it's some type of movement. But yes, you're correct. You're trying to give a space for the cognitive response to actually be something that you want to say, and not necessarily something that's grounded in heavy emotion. Not that there's anything wrong with heavy emotion, but you want to bring down that emotional response, usually, especially in a work setting, right? So.
Now, what else? I mean, a lot of this is trying to create, I suppose, habits in our lifestyle or
Mhm.
practices, I should say, that will enable this to happen more easily, to sort
Mhm.
of more rather than reacting, to get more into responding or pausing and responding.
Mhm.
What have you found that's been helpful for you to create that as a practice in
Mhm.
your life or in the life of the people you've sort of worked with?
Sure. Uh, I'll be honest, it's asking for that space to process and then ultimately respond. It is so hard for us to ask for ourselves anything. And
Mm.
so asking for myself, can I have a moment to process this and come back and respond to our conversation, the change? Can I formulate some thoughts? So asking first and foremost for that space for yourself is something that we should allow ourselves to do. Honestly, we should gift that to ourselves, is that space. And then what has worked for me quite a bit and for my clients is movement, truly. Whether it's walking, whether it's running, whether it's baking. I love baking. That's how I ponder. Frankly, a lot of people ponder all the things in the shower, and kudos to you. But I ponder while I'm baking or while I'm cooking, and so that movement of my brain in a different way helps me come back in a way where I've done something that fuels me and I can actually respond in a way where I'm more positive. I'm motivated, right? I have the serotonin going in terms of the feelings of well being, and I'm in a much better place in terms of responding to change.
I like that, and those sort of activities, and I presume baking for you gets you quite mindful, doesn't it? You get right in the moment, which is, we know when we're in the present, which is not always often. We don't think we are, but we're not always often in the present. We are the most at peace because our body goes, "Great, I can control everything at this moment because I'm in the
Great.
presence," which is,
I can control science, I can control baking because it's measuring
yes,
things, right? So, it
yeah,
is going back to something that you can control, you're right. Something that you can control when there are many, many things out there that you can't control, especially change.
yeah. And I talk a lot about with clients where if you think about the future too much, not so we don't plan,
Mm,
get caught up with the future, our body, our system goes, whoa, I'm uncertain of that. So I start to get anxious about that. And if you go into the other way, the past, you get depressed because you can't do anything about it. And so that's that trying to get in that moment, isn't it? It's trying to create mindful moments in the present moments and just that being, being present. Now, knowing this sort of, I suppose, biological, neurochemical things that are going on in our brains, and every human responds in this way. Obviously, others will manage it in different ways. If you're a leader and you're about
mm,
to embark on a huge change, sort of project, reorganization, new sort of client base, whatever it may be, what sort of thing as a leader, based on that sort of brain science, that we could
mm.
help people move through that in a way that's help them manage their sort of own sort of response to that change?
I love that question, and Julian, what I love even more is that you and I didn't script this or talk about pre questions or anything, and you teed that one up because what I was a psychology major. I'm constantly intrigued by brain chemistry and more importantly, understanding how all of the connections in our brains influence our experience of the world. And so when we look at employee engagement, organizational change, and being leaders, from a psychological perspective, the emotions and the feelings an employee has are the underpinning of the employee experience. And so the physiological response within the brain that creates feelings of excitement and connection, that organizations should strive to cultivate those through their processes, programs, and practices. So I think this is a two-part question in my mind, which is leaders need to become more self-aware of their emotions and their responses to change. And then they need to understand the emotions of others and have empathy, but also get a little sciencey and a little brainy, because what happens deep within our brains as employees can be magnified by how we initiate change as leaders, or is magnified by how we initiate change as leaders. And so if you're magnifying a flight or fight response, that goes one direction when you're initiating change. If you are magnifying things like dopamine, serotonin, norepinephrine, the neurotransmitters and the chemicals that form bonds that reshape your brain in a positive way, then you're really sort of, elevating the organization and elevating people to accept and engage in that change. So if I go back to your original question, leaders need to become more self-aware and empathetic, and then really take a look from a psychological perspective at the emotions and feelings and how that manifests themselves in their processes, programs, and practices, and how the two can actually be nicely married together.
So what sort of things to try and elevate the more
Mm,
positive, engaging sort of brain chemicals? What can a leader do if they're
mm,
about to announce this change, which could cause some concern for people, and
mm.
just the fact that it's changed, even positive change can make people a bit uneasy as well.
Right. It's still
Because people get
unsettling.
because people get stuck in their ways, don't they? We've always done it this
Mhm.
way and all that sort of stuff. And so, what is it the language you use, the approach, the forum? What's the best way of doing that to ensure you get the I guess the best brain chemicals going around the organization?
All of it. So I love to use a change model, whether it's an ADKAR model by Prosy, whether it's an activation energy model, or some other type of model, to plan out my communications and to really be thoughtful about how I am creating awareness of the change within the population. That has to start with leadership. Leadership has to be aware, and they have to be your change champions. But then you need to create that desire. And so your communications, they have to take on this level of, this is an important change. This is an exciting change. And so you have to really set forth this vision for ultimately what it's going to be and the ideal outcome of this change, and get people excited about it. And so utilizing a change model is really effective in helping you plan out those steps of communication, the forms by which you will communicate, the ways that you're going to engage your change champions, how you're going to reward and recognize and appreciate individuals when they've moved through the change, and what kind of training and knowledge they need, if there's any, to actually be more effective post change.
So you've sort of shared your thoughts on the change to an organization. Some people are really excited by this, they're really engaged, and there's a number of people who've gone a little bit the other way and are
Mhm.
feeling very anxious, almost scared about it all for whatever reason. And you can almost say, oh, they're being emotional about it, but
Mhm.
it's happening to reality to them.
Yeah.
And so, how would you work with them to try and, I suppose, get them into a place that's more positive? What sort of things can we do when things are really kicking off in their sort of brains, that's all a bit more amygdala driven and sort of fight or flight approach?
Sure. At first, I thought you were talking about our audience, and I was like, "Oh, well, that's very insight." So, let's talk to the audience a little bit more. So, our brains require structure, and that's where you will always have a pocket of individuals who are very excited for the change, or excited for the change, and they're on board, they're ready to go. And the reality is, it's absolutely okay to have an equal or even bigger pocket of individuals who are like, I don't know. I'm really unsure about this. And that's where structure can come into play. And that's why I talk about a model for change. But also, when you notice that people need a little bit more structure because they're off on this spiral and they're spinning, um, talk about goals. Talk about goals of the change, their impact, and their ability to be part of the change in a positive way, what it will mean for them. Um, Talk to them about just providing more clarity, right, on the change. Give them a space to ask questions. Oftentimes, leaders say, "This is the change. This is how it's happening. We're going to go forward. Let me know if you have any questions," right? But when you equip your managers and your other sort of like middle line managers to have conversations and open up forums for questions, that decreases the emotional response simply because you've created a space for them to voice what they're feeling, right? And so I think that's first and foremost. Give those spaces for people to process and ask questions, and then provide some additional structure, because that's ultimately what they want to know is how they fit in.
Hmm. Yeah, and I've in the past, when I've done a lot of sort of change in organizations, I've actually proactively shared the Kubler-Ross curve,
Mhm,
to almost show people and almost give people permission to say, this is sort of emotions you might go through.
mhm.
And some of you go at different times, different speeds, and some will dwell longer, and then almost talk about some of the things, how we can help each other at the different stages. And I found that bizarrely quite helpful, almost to
Mhm.
preempt, and then you're going to talk about the change. And I've done this in organizations where I've helped them work it through, and it's been quite a powerful, it's a very simple tool, but it's very powerful just to go, wow, so that's what's going on, that's why I go into denial, that's what's going on there. And I think that's been really helpful, can't it?
Right, absolutely. I love that you share that in your practice because I do as well. And then I usually, depending on the group, I have them read Who Moved My Cheese, which is just the simplest, lighthearted book of 45 pages that I've ever read. But you have individuals identify themselves and where they are within the change and how they approach change. And you create that awareness that we were talking about previously of their responses to change, and then you walk them through the Kubler-Ross curve and you say, your perception is reality and all of this is okay. We're going to meet you where you are. And here's how we're going to do that.
And obviously within change, one of the good ways is getting people to voice their opinions and get some conversations going. But we need to create an environment that's psychologically safe as well, don't we? And that's always important, isn't it? And what have you done in terms of doing that within organizations and teams, get that psychologically safe, where people actually feel they can not challenge actually challenge the change of what's been going on, to contribute in a way that's in a critical and right, in a positive way. So what's
Right.
been your practice for that?
Right, absolutely. I think you and I, on one of our previous calls, we talked about the four stages of psychological safety,
Mm.
and the first is really just feeling like a sense of belonging and inclusion safety. So you're not going to um, get real questions and real dialogue from your people if they don't feel included and feel a sense of belonging within your organization. So first and foremost, you need to foster that as a stepping stone to actually getting psychological safety in the organization. And then they have to be able to learn. They need learner safety to be able to actually try new things within the change, learn new things. Um, and then you get them to a place where they can contribute, right? They feel included in a sense of belonging and they feel like they're part of the organization and they can be part of this change in a positive way. They're learning about what that change means to them and they're gaining new skills, and then they can contribute and even challenge healthily if we get to that fourth stage of
Mm.
psychological safety. But you've got to get those first two stages right in terms of inclusion and learner safety for individuals to feel like they can contribute and actually ask questions, be those partners for other individuals who may be struggling. And oftentimes you tackle those two stages in your everyday culture and the culture that you cultivate within the organization based on your core values and your mission and your vision. So it's not as if you're starting from square one, but you need to be conscious of building
Mm.
a psychologically safe culture from the beginning, especially if you're going to initiate change or you know that change is going to be part of how you evolve and how you grow as a business.
And what have you found the best way to get those first 2 points in terms of the learner safety and the inclusion side of things? What have you done to help organizations or leaders to initiate things to create that?
Sure. I think, inclusion safety starts with your new hire onboarding program, honestly, and making new hires feel welcome and setting a core value of inclusion. I think is a wonderful thing and something that every company should do. And they should define inclusion and what that means to them from an organizational standpoint. But helping people feel included in a sense of belonging, especially the first day that they start, is really important. And then having that new hire onboarding program actually promote learning, promote experimentation, trying new things, That's where you get your new hires really excited and psychologically safe to move to that contributor and even challenger safety. And then with your current team, integrating some of those practices of inclusion, allowing people to have voices in shared forums, leaders being conscious of when they're not creating spaces where people want to voice their opinion. There's a whole awareness that needs to happen with your people to really understand this. I'm actively observing that it's not an inclusive environment, right? And how do I correct that? How do I give people more voices? How do I get different and diverse voices?
And leaders have a huge responsibility through role modeling, don't they, in terms of how they contribute, how they show learning, vulnerability, how they challenge, and all that type of. We know that role modeling is one of the most powerful ways for people to know the boundaries, to know the culture, to know almost how it works. And I think it's leaders being mindful of the role they play in who they are, their behaviors, isn't it?
Yes, absolutely. Because your people are going to map onto that. Whoever you are as a leader, they're going to identify what they want to map onto, and absolutely what they don't want to map onto. And so being that leader who is the role model of the core values and promoting culture, people will notice if you're not.
So just coming to the end, really, I'd like to ask you, what's one thing you wish you knew or understood about how the brain works in response to change many years ago that would be really helpful for you sort of 10, 20 years ago?
All of it. All of it. I mean, I'm 40, so when I was 20, I made a lot of decisions that, I question now had I known about brain chemistry. But I think what I wish I had known most about was neuroplasticity and the brain's ability to actually form new neural connections based on your reality, based on the environment that you put yourself in, and based on the people that you surround yourself with and the experiences that you engage in. I really wish that I had known the power of forming those new neural connections in a positive way, versus in a way that had me in my own little bubble for quite some time. So neuroplasticity and the power of just creating something that's new in your brain.
Yeah, it's quite powerful, the brain, isn't it? Powerful in a negative sense sometimes, but also
Yes.
powerful once you understand and start to tame it, and I guess work with it all and start to create those new neural pathways.
Yes.
It's been great talking to you, Sarah. If
So much.
people want to get in touch with you, connect with you, what's the best way of doing that?
Sure. So I'm Sarah Katherine Schmidt on LinkedIn, and my email address is sarah@peoplelogic.ai. So feel free to email me or send me a note on LinkedIn. I always love talking about this, as well as anything performance management, anything HR, people operations, employee experience. So love a good conversation. My mom always says I could start one with anybody. So hopefully we can do a virtual coffee or a virtual tea.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Sarah.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll talk to you soon. Thank you all.